Well, joining me now from Roanoke, Virginia is John Fishwick Jr. He's a trial lawyer and former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Virginia. Welcome to the program.
Welcome. Thanks so much for having me on, Gerald.
So much to talk about. I think let's start with immigration because, I think many are asking, what are the legal requirements for deploying military assets in immigration enforcement in light of the very strict statutory limits on the armed forces operating on U.S. soil?
Well, Gerald, I think we're in uncharted legal territory with Trump's executive orders, particularly as you mentioned. I think two things. One is, can you use the military on the border there to protect from immigrants coming into our country? Can the United States military be used for that? Is that a national emergency? I think we're going to see lawsuits over that to determine can the military be deployed on the border. After all, that's not really what they were envisioned to do. And I think on the birthright citizenship, we're going to see a lot of litigation over that. After all, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, as was mentioned earlier, says if you're born in this country, you're a citizen. So I think a lot of these executive orders President Trump campaigned on, and he was loud and clear about it. But I think a number of these orders that he's signed last night are going to run into rocky legal waters, and it's going to take years to sort out. I think ultimately a number of these cases are going to make their way to the United States Supreme Court.
I want to jump on that point you mentioned, President Trump declaring a national emergency at the southern border. This unlocks a host of powers for the government, of course, but does the current situation fit the definition of a national emergency, which sounds more like an unexpected crisis? We've known what's going on all this while.
I guess which side of the political spectrum on is whether you say it's a national emergency, but ultimately a court will decide that. And so I think a lot of judges would say, really, it's not a national emergency. In fact, there have been some improvements with the immigration situation over the last year under the Biden administration. So I think there's going to be a real question, can we deploy our military to the border? And I think another question is, besides just the legal question of is this a national emergency, I mean, is that the right place for our military to be? After all, we've got a lot of crises around the world, in the Middle East and in other such places. Where should our military be deployed? I think there's a real question of whether they need to be at the border and whether that's the best use of them. But I think legally it's an open question that may ultimately make its way to the Supreme Court as well.
The other point you brought up was President Trump signing that executive order to end birthright citizenship. How legal is this? I mean, we've talked about it being enshrined in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, of course, but do you see this going all the way to the Supreme Court? And if so, how do you see that playing out?
I think there's no question it's going to make its way to the Supreme Court. The 14th Amendment is a constitutional right that says, if you're born in America, you're a U.S. citizen. It's what everybody has always thought the law was. But the Supreme Court's shown in recent years they can turn things upside down quickly. And so I think the folks who want to enforce the Trump new rule, the new executive order, his legal team, they want to head towards the Supreme Court. I think they think they're on safe grounds there. It has been pretty clear before today that if you're born in this country, you're a U.S. citizen, no question about it, no matter who your parents are. But I think now this is headed to the Supreme Court, and as we've seen, they do not have a problem kind of reversing long-time legal precedents.
Well, but on the other hand, you've got another executive order, very much talked about, especially on social media, the delay of that ban on TikTok for 75 days. This, of course, a reprieve, relief for millions of the app's users, but the Supreme Court already upheld the ban and the deadline has passed. So, I mean, what's all this? What happens next? I'm just confused.
Yeah, everything is very uncertain in the TikTok world right now, as you point out. So the law was it had to either be sold or shut off by January 19th, and that wasn't sold by January 19th. And this was a law. It was passed by Congress and signed by President Biden. And so President Trump has issued an executive order, but under the law, a law that has been passed by Congress and signed by a president carries more weight than an executive order. An executive order cannot overrule that. So what Trump's trying to do is he's the art of the deal. He says, look, I can put together a deal. Let's have a 75-day extension while I try to put something back together. I think legally, in order for TikTok to stay alive, they will have to go back to Congress and say, look, we found a new buyer. We're asking Congress to approve that this new buyer can own TikTok and that the president would have to sign it. Ultimately, though, right where we stand today is the law of the land is what the Supreme Court upheld. And so unless Congress takes new actions on TikTok, I don't think Trump's executive order can overturn what Congress and Biden did with the law that's in place today.
I believe the theme here, you mentioned it earlier, uncharted legal territory. John Fishwick Jr., trial lawyer, thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.